Mr. Brewer, you were chosen to begin with the opening statement segment of the forum. So you're on, and your 2 minutes start now.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for hosting this event tonight, and it's certainly an honor to be back here with you. I think I've been with you probably for the past 10 years during Dodge City Days, so I'm just here a little sooner. And certainly just to let you know, I won't be cooking this year like in previous years. But just to give you a little information about me, for those that don't know me, my name is Carl Brewer. I was the former mayor of Wichita, and I come from corporate America, worked my way from the very bottom to the very top. And I started out as a sheet metal assembler, was also a representative of labor unions, and I served in the military 21 years, and served as a private, worked my way off candidate school, and become commissioned. I commanded infantry soldiers in preparing them to go to combat. I've served as a community activist and started out, just like many of you, working in my community, working in my neighborhood, trying to help others out, to speak for those that could not speak for themselves. And Kansas has been good for me. I have 13 grandchildren, and 4 children, and 5 grandchildren. That's a whole bunch of children. But we've been good to Kansas, for us here in Kansas, and I want them to stay here. But we have some real challenges that are ahead of us. I served as president of Kansas League of Municipalities, and I represented many of you right here in this city and in rural Kansas when we started having issues with agriculture, and also during the worst recession in the history of this country. And this is about bringing somebody together that understand your needs, understand your want, but also willing to give you a voice as we move forward in the future here in the state of Kansas. And so that way we can make sure that your generations, that they stay here, and we have everyone having an opportunity to have representation.
Thank you. Mr. Swati, you are next.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for the host. Thank you for coming out, to all of you, on a Tuesday evening. This is an important election cycle, and we're thrilled that you're here to listen to all of us. I'm going to make a bit of a joke. I think this might be one of our very last forums of this primary. I hope it doesn't get too bloody. I say that because my driver who's with me this evening has a lot of blood on his slacks already. We toured National Beef this morning at Liberal, and I'm not sure where he stepped that I didn't. But we had an incredible opportunity to sit down with the plant manager there, talk about workforce here in Southwest Kansas. But it's great now for us to be here in Garden City. I also had my advanced team here last Thursday checking things out. My 3 oldest kids came down with all of their cousins and spent a day at Parrot Cove, because Tuesdays and Thursdays are $5 Tuesday, Thursdays. They had a wonderful time and loved being here. I'm originally from Ellsworth, Kansas. My family's been there for 5 generations. One other shout out I have to give to my cousin, Dr. Rachel Swati, who's a new member of this community and the only female family practitioner here in Garden City. Loves being a part of the community, and we love having her here. This is a change election, and I believe that Kansas is ready for change. I believe that Kansas is ready for the next generation to step forward and lead, and I believe that I and my running mate, Katrina Lewison, represent that change. I grew up on a farm. I served 7 years in the legislature, then was Kansas Secretary of Agriculture, then worked at the Environmental Protection Agency and then the Land Institute. My running mate is Katrina Lewison. She is a West Point graduate. She flew Black Hawk helicopters in the Iraq War, went back to teach at West Point, and then she and her husband moved back to Kansas, where she's from, and she's now on the Manhattan School Board. My wife and I have 4 kids. Katrina and her husband have 3 kids. We wrestle with the issues that Kansans face every single day. Childhood care, where to go to school, and all the other decisions in between. We know what Kansans are going through, and we think it's time for a positive, brighter vision for the future of the state of Kansas, and we feel that we can do that. Thank you.
And thank you. Next, Senator Kelly.
Thank you very much for you all being here. I learned something when I came into Garden City today, that you are no longer the record holder on the world's largest concrete swimming pool. I was very disappointed to hear that. I spent 18 years as executive director for the Kansas Recreation and Park Association, so I was here with your Park and Rec director at the time, John Washington, many, many times. Anyway, I am a state senator on the side. I'm a wife and a mother. I grew up in a military family, and so lived all over the world. But when my husband and I became parents, we chose Kansas to call home. And we did that 32 years ago, and we came here because of the stellar schools, good jobs, and that strong sense of community. And that is exactly why I am running for governor. I want to make sure that every Kansan, no matter who you are or where you live, has the same opportunities to succeed that my young family had. You know, fighting for kids and families in Kansas has been a lifelong mission of mine, and that means that we need to invest in our kids and in their schools. When Sam Brownback made the largest cuts to our schools in state history, I fought back. I led the efforts to expand early childhood education, doubling the number of kids entering kindergarten ready to learn. I led the bipartisan effort to repeal the Brownback-Collier tax experiment and put Kansas back on the road to recovery. She just blew me off when you did that. So anyway, I'm the only candidate up here who's been fighting Sam Brownback and Jeff Collier for the last 8 years. I'm the only one who knows where the problems are. I'm the only one who can walk into that office on day one and start to work using my relationships with the legislature to get the job done.
Thank you, Senator. And fourth candidate is Mr. Bergeson.
All right. Well, my name is Jeff Bergeson, and I'm running for Kansas governor because I believe Kansans are ready for a change. We have seen what career politicians have done to the state. Sam Brownback, who had spent many years in the U.S. Senate before he became our governor, he has destroyed our state. We have the biggest issue, and this is true not just in Kansas, but around the globe and around the United States, is that politicians are bought by the big corporations, and then they go and do the bidding of the corporations, not the people. I'm not like that. I only take money from working Kansans, just like you. So when I become governor, I will only be responsive to the people of Kansas. We need to really we really need to look at real solutions to the issues at hand. And that's what I've been fighting for since day one. I was the first candidate to talk about the legalization of marijuana. I'm the only candidate that has stood up for transportation and making sure the train stays here in Garden City and adding more rail service across the state of Kansas. These are things we need to look at. And I really don't think any other candidates have been talking about the issues that really affect Kansas. And that's why Jack Bergeson is the best candidate for governor.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you with your opening comments. Thank you very much. Now we'll begin the question and answer portion of the forum, and as previously stated, each of you will be allowed 2 minutes to respond to a question. And prior to tonight, we drew names at random to start the process. Mr. Swati was chosen to be first for answering the initial question, and then the order of candidate responses will rotate as I call each of you for the subsequent questions. So, Mr. Swati, let's begin with the questions if you're ready. The first question that we have for you tonight is, what do you believe is the role of state government?
So this is kind of fun. This is the first time we've been asked this. There are things that we expect out of our civil society that we cannot deliver on our own, or are delivered better when we all do it collectively. And I think that is what we have tried to accomplish here in the United States. I think we've done very well at it through our history. I think Kansas in particular has demonstrated that we were always a state willing to push the boundaries and push forward on the services that we could deliver to as many Kansans as possible. And we've done very well with that. And frankly, I think the last 8 years are a sad hiccup in what has otherwise been a really sterling history of this state over the last 150 years of very reasonable people, both Republican and Democrat, coming together and saying, how can we build the appropriate roads and infrastructure into every corner of the state of Kansas? How can we make sure every single student across the state of Kansas receives as close to the same education as possible? How can we deliver health care services that are relatively equal all across the state? And I think that's what government is. And what scares me now more than anything is that we are not modeling the type of leadership that teaches our children that this is what our government should look and act like. We are still delivering many of those services in the same way that we have in the past, but our leaders at the top are not modeling that. And that's not only here in the state of Kansas, but that's also at the federal level as well. And so a lot of what we have to fix is stabilizing our state government, making sure the finances are okay. But I think above and beyond that, it's time for a fresh perspective with people that are running this government that all Kansans can look to and say, we're proud of this. We're proud of our experiment. We're proud of the investment we're making in the future. And we recognize the administration that we have now as the people that represent that and can pull us forward.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer, you've been chosen to be second in line.
Okay. Well, certainly as serving as a former mayor, I've had an opportunity to see what has happened at the state level and at the national level. And the role of the state government is supposed to be a resource to be able to support us on what our vision and our dreams are. And as we start working on growing our economies, educating our children, or taking care of infrastructure issues, they're supposed to be there as a support element, not as a dictator as to defining what we're going to be. We do that portion at the bottom level in our communities and our neighborhoods, and they support us and they make sure that we are successful. And they've done a terrible job at that here for the past 8 years. They pretty much have dictated to us exactly what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and oh, by the way, these are the decisions that we have made, so you live with them. Well, that's incorrect, and that's wrong. And under my administration, there is no way we're going to do that because I've already been there, done that. I've been in your shoes. And I want to be someone that's going to be there to be able to support you and work with you as you start growing your communities, addressing school issues, addressing healthcare issues, addressing your streets and your highways, and making sure that they're adequate so that you can be successful.
Thank you. Mr. Ferguson.
I think the state government needs to make sure that everyone has access to those same basic human rights. Healthcare, make sure everyone has an opportunity to have an adequate education, that there's an adequate sense that the government is really trying to protect people and not those at the top, that it's really for everyone and not just those at the top, which is what we see right now in the state and federal level. So I really think what we need to do is we need to look at who's funding the politicians, and we also need to look at, because that really relates to everything. Because that relates, okay, if only the rich are paying the politicians, they don't really care what happened to the schools or all that. Because, the rich people, they can send their kids to the best schools, but we really need to make sure that our state government is working for everybody. I think that's really a missed goal. I'm out of it today.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's all right. Senator Kelly.
Thank you. This is actually a great question, one that we have not been asked before. But clearly in Kansas, it is in our Constitution that the first role of government is to provide an adequate and equitable public education to all of our students. That's our number one responsibility as a state government. Then we also should be providing for the public safety of our citizens. We do that both at the state level and by partnering with our local communities so that we can ensure that our citizens are safe and secure. And then I think the third thing that government ought to be doing a lot of, and we've not been really good at it the last 8 years, is partnering with our local, not only governments, but our local communities, our local businesses, to make Kansas a good place for people to live, for people to work, and for people to raise their family. And we do that by not imposing our will on local control, but rather working with our locals so that they can use their assets to develop themselves and grow in a way that works for them. So I think that we need to go back to the days when Kansas had in place a number of structures that really provided opportunities for us to work with our local businesses and our local governments so that each community could use their assets and develop and grow.
Thank you. I'm going to interject one thing before we go to the second question. I've heard twice now that this was the first time you heard that question. We pride ourselves here in Finney County and throughout southwest Kansas as being the first. So. Second question. What do you believe are things that state government is doing correctly? And some of it you may have already alluded to and you may want to just repeat and enhance. And what are things that the state needs, that at the state level need to be improved or eliminated? And Mr. Brewer, you're first up.
That's a good question also. Okay, the first start off with the things that the state government has not been doing correctly. One, implementing policy that have unintended consequences and not giving it a thorough process as to figuring out what the impact is going to be. And not to mention the fact, leaving it in place and going on and coming home and doing their various different things until maybe when the next session come around. And maybe they may remember to remove it, maybe they may not. As such as tying local governments and your community's hands as to what they can do as far as tax issues, how they're going to address issues with school and healthcare, businesses that are supposed to be growing, and we're not making that extra effort to be able to do that. Now, the things that the state is doing correctly, to the best of their ability, they did make some changes this previous year, and they did give some school funding, nowhere near enough to be able to make sure that our children get an education. Because they just don't understand that our children are not competing with the states of the Northeast, Southwest, but they're competing with the rest of the world. And we owe them that to be able to make sure that they are successful in the future. But we also owe them that so that they will be the next generation of workforce that's here inside of our community. The other thing that the state could actually be doing better is, one, identifying what we actually have and trying to diversify what we actually have as far as growing our economies in our communities, recognizing that we're all unique, and going out and working to export our goods. And that's something that I did when I was mayor, and we had the worship session. I came to your communities and recognized that you had beef and you had agriculture, the other items that we can actually sell, and went to other countries, took some of your people in your community with me to go sell our goods and let them know what Kansas was about and what we had to offer.
Thank you. And I should have interjected earlier. If you need me to repeat a question as we go through these, let me know, and I will be glad to do that. Second is Mr. Bergerson.
There's very few things the state government is doing correctly right now. I mean, I think one of the biggest things, I'm going to use this, the DCF, the fact that DCF has lost over 70 children. I will plan to prosecute those involved in the missing of the 70 children in state custody. It is a crime and it is wrong, and the gross negligence that was involved in that. So I think we really have to look at reforming the state agencies to make sure that the state agencies are on track and that we have true civil servants in there doing their job and that are paid well and have good job conditions. I also think Kansas can do what Colorado and Washington and other states around us have done and legalize marijuana. Not only is it a civil rights issue, it is also an economics issue. We can do what those states have done and legalize it and help go fund our schools. So I think those are two things that have been done in other states that we look at. Also, we're lagging behind in rail transportation. If you look at states like Missouri and Connecticut are two great examples that I like to look at. They have robust rail systems and they partner with Amtrak and they are able to get more rail service between their cities. That's something we're lacking on, and we can look at other states as models. So I really think there is not a lot the state government is doing. We've lost children and we're behind on things that could help our economic development. I have to say I cannot give a lot of credit to Brownback and Collier. The only thing I can really say is the legislature has somewhat began to improve school funding, but that's about the only thing I can say. We need to make sure that we are raising our teachers' wages. Right now, Kansas teachers are some of the lowest paid in the country. If we could raise teacher pay, we could get more teachers into the state of Kansas, and we could keep Kansas's teachers here instead of moving out of state, so we can make sure Kansas has the best education system in the nation.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you. I can get what we're doing correctly in less than 2 minutes, but I cannot do everything we're doing incorrectly in 2 minutes. But I'll try. One thing I think that we are doing well at this particular point is the investments that we've made in our career and technical education programs. We have really dropped down into the classrooms in the high school and developed programs so that kids can really get a head start on either a technical certificate or higher education classes. So that's the one thing I think we've done right in the past few years. Now, the things that we've done wrong. Well, one, we passed the 2012-2013 tax cuts, which took us over a cliff and really decimated our entire state. So there is not a state agency that you can look out right now that is functioning the way that it should be. Whether you look at our schools, you look at our Department of Children and Families, you look at the roads, all the road projects that have been canceled or the maintenance that has not been done. All of this is a result of those tax cuts that Brownback and Collier implemented in 2012 and 2013. 2013. Thank goodness the legislature did reverse most of that last year, and we were able to override Governor Brownback's veto, but we still have a long way to go. We have no idea. It's probably going to take us a decade to really get out of the holes that have been dug during this current administration, both Brownback and Collier. So, as we look forward, as we look into the next administration, we have got to put somebody in that office who understands the problems, knows how to solve them, and has the relationships to get the things done.
Thank you, Mr. Swanee.
There's a lot of things going well in Kansas. For starters, we're still a small state, so there's a lot of collegiality that takes place among legislators. I look at Washington, D.C., and it is clearly broken. Both sides are not speaking to each other. Whereas in Kansas, I think that the legislature, although it went through definitely a rough patch, is improving, it's functioning better. When I look at someone like John Dahl, who was here this evening, John Dahl and I hate each other's guts, but we smile at each other and fake it. There's a basis of friendship there. I'm obviously joking. And we joke because we have that collegiality, all of us that serve together in public service have that collegiality. We can get things done. It is very difficult to get 63 votes in the House and 21 votes in the Senate to pass any sort of tax package. And the legislature this last session had to get to a supermajority, 84 in the House and 27 in the Senate. That's an incredible dedication among both Republicans and Democrats to get that done. I'm also optimistic about the Kansas CAN program, the classroom redesign. My brother is the lead teacher on that at Liberal High School. This is a forward-thinking effort to rethink the classroom of the future. Our Department of Ed is leading that. They're going to begin implementing those changes in the next few years. And I think that it's an exciting way to think about how we deliver education across the state of Kansas and deliver it in a better way. Finally, I think we still have a fairly stable regulatory environment. I used to work at the Environmental Protection Agency, and I know that large feedlots, large feeders look to Kansas because the Department of Health and Environment works well with those feedlot operators. They're still strict, but they make sure that the communication lines are open. So with the last 30 seconds, obviously, government has not functioned well at the agency level and at the administrative level in the last 8 years, driven largely because I think of great disrespect for the civil service employees that implement that work each and every day. We've got to rebuild that respect. We have to pay them appropriately. We have to build back the civil protections to keep them in their positions because they are the ones that make our government run each and every day, whether it's the Department of Ag, or the Department of Transportation, or the Department of Children and Families, and we have to rebuild those.
Thank you very much. Third question in our list tonight. What is the role of state government in relationship with local governing bodies such as the counties, the cities, and the school boards? And what is your belief regarding home rule and local control? And it's been alluded to, but please expand on it, those who have already referenced it. And Mr. Bergeson, you're first on this one.
I think this is a really important issue because I think this is something that's been talked about quite a bit. What we need to do is we need to make sure that there is a good communication line between Topeka and the local governments. Right now I don't really see that necessarily. I want to make sure that when the state government implements a rule that will directly affect municipal governments, that they have a way to talk to Topeka about that. Because I really think the way it is right now, it is difficult for cities to understand what is asked of them, and it's hard for the Topeka and the city governments to work together, which when you have the two bodies of government and they don't get along, that's when things become very messy. So I really need to make sure that there is very clear communication lines between Topeka and municipal governments, and that we I will, as governor, I will work with the municipal governments to make sure that any new laws and any new regulations will not be unwillingly burdensome on the city governments, because I do not want to make life harder for any of the city workers and city politicians, because they're just as important as all the rest of us. So I really think that really working with everyone, working with all level government, city and county, is the best way for the state government to work, and I won't be like an overlord saying, you must do this and you must do that. That never works. You've got to work together, and that will be what my administration does when dealing with municipal governments.
Thank you. Senator Kelly?
Thank you. Actually, my 18 years when I was executive director of the Kansas Recreation and Park Association gave me a deep appreciation for the role of local government and our school boards because I spent a lot of time working with the League of Municipalities. So I really appreciate and understand what it is we've elected our local officials to do, whether it's to our city commission, county commission, or our school boards. And I believe that we should be partners. I think I have a long record in the state Senate of voting for local control and against control. And, you know, for instance, I did not vote to place the property tax lid on the counties. You know, I truly believe that you elect your county commissioners to make those decisions for you. And if you don't like the decision they made, you can hold them accountable. I should not be the one telling them what to do. I believe the same thing with schools. You know, there are oftentimes in the state Senate and in the House when we are debating bills that are really taking the control of what happens locally out of the hands of your school board. I vote consistently against that because, again, I believe that you know the people you elected, you're the closest to them, they're the closest to you, and they know what your district needs a whole lot more than I do, you know, 300 miles away. So you can rest assured that as governor, I will work as a partner with our local units of government and with our school boards so that we can all win.
Thank you. Mr. Swati?
I as well agree very much in cooperation and in home rule. Specifically to the school boards, the situation we see most often at the state level is these bills that try to define, well, we should actually spend 75% of our dollars in the classroom, and the legislature inserting itself on really what is a school board discussion. And so we either trust in the democratic process and the local communities and those local school districts to elect those individuals, or we don't. And the state should stay out of those discussions largely. And so people ask, well, how much is enough for schools? And I said, well, listen, the school boards continue to come forward and say, this is where we're strapped. We actually have enough money here, but this is where we've got problems. And can the state do something about it? As long as we continue to hear from school boards discussing the areas where they have needs, we need to respond to that because they are, as was said, the first line in terms of people that are being elected and the closest to their constituencies. And then for the counties, I go back to the things that we used to do, whether it was City County Revenue Sharing Fund or the local ad valorem tax reduction fund. These were efforts that the state had to give some of those property tax dollars back to the counties, and they were intended and did help keep property taxes lower. So now we have a real problem with property taxes. We all hear it as we go around the state. We know it. We feel it firsthand. And that's being driven by, in part, the starvation of the counties by the state level. And so they're trying to deliver services as well as they can directly to their constituents, and they've received almost no help from the state. It's time, once again, that they have a fair partner in the state, and that we look to find ways to cooperate and move forward with them. And I think one of those is to go back to what we were doing in the very beginning, in the early 2000s, that local ad valorem tax reduction fund.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer?
Well, I'm a firm believer that local government in cities and counties should have the responsibility. They are the ones that are in the trenches, they're the ones that are taking care of you. I've already been a mayor. But the other portion is I've also been president of the Kansas League of Municipalities, which represent all of the cities in the state of Kansas and all of the mayors. And I've seen where we have actually went and we've taken issues when they tied our hands and not allowed us to be able to address issues as property taxes, how they've not allowed us to be able to address issues such as our streets and our infrastructure, how they've allowed us to not be able to fix our streets, fix our roads, and to repair bridges, particularly when we need those to be able to export our goods, and they tell us figure out a way to do it, but you're not going to raise any type of taxes in that nature. We went there, and I've seen how legislators look at us as mayors and as leaders and saying these are the things that we need, and we need your support, and how they turned away and looked the other way and would not talk to us. I'm not that type of governor. I've already been there. I've seen it. I wasn't happy with it when it was happening to me. And one of the things that I intend to do as governor is make sure that I have communications with commissioners and mayors and city council members so that I can find out what it is that you need. What do the people that you serve need? And then be there as a resource to help them and take that message back to the legislators. Because sometimes what you're telling them, they just don't understand it. And they need someone to be able to communicate it to them. And I'm willing to be that person that can do that, whether they be Republican or whether it be Democrat or independent. Cross those party lines and get into people to understand that you're the number one priority and we listen and we work for you.
Thank you to all four of you. Fourth question. What is the role of state government in bridging the divide between urban and rural Kansas? Mr. Bergeson?
think that this all comes down to equity. I think one of the biggest things is we need to look at making sure our education systems are equitable in rural and urban areas. And like if you look at the difference between a school in Johnson County and a school in rural western Kansas, most of the times it's not very similar, and the quality of education is sometimes much better in the urban areas like Johnson and Sedgwick County than it is outside of that. So we really need to look at that and really make sure, okay, are we getting the same types of funding? Are we giving the same types of funding, and are we giving the same types of resources to that? Also one thing on this education issue, I think one thing we can look at is providing pay incentives so teachers will be more inclined to move to rural areas to teach, or teachers be more inclined to stay in that area. I also think make sure that there's adequate transportation networks. I've talked about this earlier. But I think we need to look at models of other states to make sure there's adequate rail transportation. Many people cannot afford a car, and they need ways to be able to get to the city, where the economic hub is. And I think an affordable rail transportation plan, we need to look at that. We need to look at expanding rail service in this state between the major cities and out to the rural areas. I think that would be also a great way to look at closing the divide, and also making sure that taxation is equal among, all. I think this is more of a class issue, but making sure that we are not taxing, putting undue burden on lower socioeconomic people. And I think we're doing that in this state. We need to make sure that the rich pay their fair share and the big corporations pay their fair share, and that way everyone can kind of be on a level playing field. And I think those will be the most important things my administration will do to make sure that we bridge the divide.
Mr. Berger.
Well, one of the things I think that's important is that we make sure that everything is fair and equitable in rural Kansas and also in urban Kansas. Because each and every one of us, we all have families, and we all have needs, and we all have wants, and they all are very similar. I've traveled this entire state, and everyone says that they want good streets, they want safe communities, they want roads, they want good quality jobs in their community. They want to be able to grow their economy. And so from that standpoint, give them the exact same respect and the resources that we should be giving, that we give the urban communities. Let's go there. Let's help them develop regional economic plans and come up with plans that are feasible, that will actually create an economic ripple effect across the entire state of Kansas. But also make sure that we create an environment where they want to keep their children there. So how do we do that? We provide them with good quality jobs. We provide them with streets. We provide an environment where they are proud to be there in that community, and to include that as they start diversifying what they actually have, provide them with the resources to help train individuals in the next generation so that they can actually stay there. Give them the exact same things that we're giving the urban communities and the rural communities the exact same way, but incentives to get individuals to, one, move there and to stay there, but also that they can have a good quality of life that everyone else is having.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
Thank you very much. As I've been traveling around the state during the campaign and before, it's very clear to me that there are actually a lot of shared priorities between our urban areas and our rural areas. Everybody wants fair and equitable funding for our school districts and adequate funding for our school districts. There's not a citizen in the state of Kansas who doesn't consider that a priority. I don't care where they live. I think the other thing that's been important to folks is infrastructure. Whether we're talking about our roads or whether we're talking about broadband, those are the kinds of things that are a concern to everybody, because they know that it's education and infrastructure are the biggest drivers of our economy anywhere, regardless of whether you're urban or you're rural. And the last thing that I think everybody shares is the desire to expand our Medicaid program. That's particularly important for our rural areas, but does impact our urban areas also. We know that without the expansion of Medicaid, that we have left $2.7 billion back in Washington, D.C., Kansas taxpayer dollars, to be distributed to other states for them to not only provide services to their citizens, but also to grow their economies. If we had expanded Medicaid, we would be providing healthcare access to 150,000 other Kansans. We would also have expanded our economy, and we would have created 5,000 to 7,000 new jobs, and those would have been both rural and urban. I do want you to know that I have put out a plan for rural prosperity. It is very comprehensive and in-depth. We have it available on my website, laurakellyforkansas.com. But one of the things I will do as governor will be to create an Office of Rural Prosperity, where we will filter all policies and all budget decisions through that to look at it through the lens of our rural communities and make sure that what we're doing is helping our communities thrive and grow.
Thank you. Mr. Swati?
So the original question was how can the state, or what's the state's role in balancing urban and rural issues? I was on a bus with Senator Janice Lee the first time she and I both discovered that KDOT built into its budget beautification along highway projects in Johnson County, that it did not spend that money on KDOT projects in western Kansas. I think Janice Lee was going to hit the ceiling of that bus. She was so mad. There's always going to be a gap. If you look at the busiest highway in the state of Kansas, it's the I-35 corridor. As you head into the heart of Johnson County, it's in somewhere between 135,000 to 150,000 cars a day. I've been on Highway 25 outside of Russell Springs, Kansas. I don't know exactly where it is, but it's not 150,000 cars a day. So there's always going to be a gap. What we have to do as a state is look at ways to be equitable, make sure that we are driving the infrastructure, the educational needs that will push regions forward. The needs and infrastructure in southwest Kansas are different than the needs in Johnson County, which are driven largely by traffic issues. Down here, it's about expanding our infrastructure so that we're able to more efficiently move our products outside of the state. Those are different, but you need a state that's focused on those and making sure that they're happening. And you need a governor that is cognizant of that and willing to listen to both sides, because there's just a difference. And then finally, there are some small things that a governor can do to make it more inclusive in state government between rural and urban divides. I was sitting with the county clerk and the county treasurer in Johnson City, Kansas last year, and the county treasurer said, you know what? I'm sick of driving all the way to the Topeka for a 2-hour meeting because they say, you know, we didn't want to take up your entire day, so we just had a 2-hour meeting. She said, I just drove 7 hours to get to Topeka. What's wrong with the secretary or someone coming out to Garden City sometime so all those regional county clerks or county treasurers can go meet in Garden City? So instead of having all of us drive 14 hours to go to a 2-hour meeting in Topeka, they come out there. And it would be an initiative of mine to get our people out in the field so that we're coming out from Topeka, meeting people where they are around the state.
Thank you. The next question in our list is, do you believe state government is overregulating and thus negatively impacting economic growth in Kansas? And if your answer is yes, how would you hold state agencies accountable for their actions? And if your answer is no, please explain why it is. And the first for this is Mr. Swati.
So the bulk of my regulatory experience is actually around environmental regulations, which when most people think of regulations, that's what they think of. So let me tell you what I learned as a senior advisor at the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 7, which governed all of Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri. Kansas does things very, very well. We have some of the largest permitted feedlots in the country and frankly the world. We have one in Grant County that's permitted for 140,000 head of cattle. If you go into Nebraska, they're extremely proud of Adams Landed cattle. It's 85,000 head. I kind of shrug my shoulders and say, why don't you come down and swim in the deep end of the pool sometime down here in Kansas? But we have strong relationships. So the businesses that move here understand the regulatory framework that they're in. They work well with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And then frankly, though they probably would never want to admit this publicly, they work pretty well with the Environmental Protection Agency. You cross those large feedlots that are permitted, sited, and appropriately designed with northeast Nebraska and northwest Iowa, the bulk of the feedlots there are 1,000 head feedlot cattle, so they're much smaller. It's much harder to regulate them. They have a lot more manure releases into streams. It's a regulatory nightmare for the state regulatory agencies and also for the individuals running those facilities. So we have a really good framework here. Just in downtown Garden City today, I met someone with Deseret Feeders, which is part of the Mormon Church. They've moved the bulk of their operations here. They have ranches all across the country, but they finished their cattle here, and that's changed within the last 5 years, and they would not be here if the regulatory framework was unpermissive of their moving to the state of Kansas. You see the same thing with the dairy industry. It's moving out of California into Kansas because we're predictable and we're a great place to do business. So I actually think our regulatory framework in the state is one of the shining examples of government working well, working with business to drive things forward and actually attract businesses from outside of the state to the state of Kansas.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer?
Well, I would say the regulatory framework that we have here in the state of Kansas, in some cases it does work. But there are some cases that it does not work. And one of the things that we should be doing is, one, going back to the particular communities and bringing communities into the conversation before they start imposing regulation on various different issues. It has hurt a lot of our industries that we actually have, whether it be in the agriculture or whether it be in manufacturing. It has hurt those particular communities in being able to do that. And you, as citizens, never had an opportunity to give your voice or give your opinion on how you thought and believed that whether it was good or whether it was bad. And we need to give that type of opportunity to everyone. And so I see those types of things because of the fact that as being mayor, there's lots of things and lots of opportunities that we have actually had here in the state of Kansas that by the time that the state finished, we couldn't do it. You have to go someplace else and go to another state or seize that opportunity in some other country. So we need to take a better look at what we're actually doing and kind of think it out farther to mean inclusion and include you and your leaders in your community as to how it's going to impact you. Even when we start talking about wind energy or whether we're talking about coal factories, things of that nature, let's talk to you about it before they go in and just implement policy on it.
Thank you. Mr. Bergerson?
You know, through my own personal experience, my family owns a restaurant in Wichita. It seems that the state regulatory program is pretty good and it's pretty efficient. But I think there are some things in terms of how it deals with businesses and how it deals with operations. I think it's gone pretty well, and I will continue to make sure it is the most efficient in the nation. However, I think I'm going to expand on this. There are many issues I think the state is not regulating properly, and I really do look back at DCF. I realize that they are not there is not a good overhead. That yes, the state agencies, that some of them might be doing their job, but some of them obviously are not. And I will make sure that as governor, I will not want to be bearing down, but I also will provide oversight to my executive administrations and making sure that they are doing their job. And I will make sure, I will be looking at them saying, are you doing your job? Are you doing your job? I won't try to say, here's what you should do. But I'm like, if they're doing something that I think is obviously wrong, I will let them know. Because if we had a governor that was doing something like that, we would not have had the problem we had with DCF and losing 70 children. And I really want to make sure that we do not have another major misstep by another state agency under my administration. So I will be looking to provide oversight in general to the state, my executive agencies. But I really think in terms of how the state government and how the state agencies are dealing with businesses and regulations, I think from my personal experience and when I've talked to other business owners, it seems that it's pretty efficient for small and large business owners. So we will improve on that, but also make sure that there is regulation on the ones at the top, because that's where the real problem is.
Thank you. Senator Kelly?
Thank you. I would agree that generally our regulatory process is adequate. I think our largest problem is on enforcement. We have a real issue with the enforcement being the same across the state. And I can give you an example that when I was with the Recreation and Park Association, those agencies are the largest provider of child care in the state. And so I worked actually for 12 years, and that is another problem. It takes too long to get anything done. But I worked for 12 years to get those regulations changed so that our park and rec agencies didn't have to use the same standards for infants as they did for school-age kids. They were requiring our school-age programs to be in fenced-in areas. Can you imagine your park programs having to fence in the entire system in order to be able to provide child care? So there are instances where we have over-regulated or regulated stupidly, and I think that's something that we really need to address, and we will. I think the other thing that we do need to do is to hold our agencies more accountable. But one of the problems that we've had is that we have so decimated them because of those tax cuts that they don't have the personnel to actually implement the regulations that are in point. And I give you an example there of our nursing industry. Our nursing homes are not receiving inspections on a regular basis, and it is setting up some critical situations for our elderly who are housed in those facilities. When we get into the office, we will fund those agencies, we will encourage them and require them to hire the inspectors so that they can go out and they can make sure that facilities are adequate and safe and providing the services that they're supposed to so that our citizens are getting quality implementation.
Thank you very much. Next question, and This is a fairly lengthy one, so again, if I need to repeat it, I'll be happy to do that. Currently, we have, and some of this has been referenced by a couple of you. Currently, we have multiple task forces and committees addressing child welfare. I believe there are 3 different citizen review panels. The Department for Children and Families, which has been referenced, task force. There's the State Board of Education Mental Health Advisory Committee and the Juvenile Justice Oversight Committee, just for examples. How can the process be streamlined so agencies are on the same page and children are not lost in the cracks? And the first for this is Mr. Brewer.
Well, certainly, the state of Kansas has had a lot of issues. When you start talking about DCF and you start talking about our children, I don't think we've missed a week that went by that we haven't had that conversation here lately. And so certainly, as everybody knows, that it's something that's pretty near and dear to me because my family's been affected by it. And the issues we've had with DCF didn't just start this year, the past 5 years, the past 7 years. This is something that has been going on for quite some time, that it's been declining. And because we were underpaying, overstaffing, didn't have it staffed with the correct people, we have to change that. We must come up with a clear process when we're talking about our children. As Jack said, he's absolutely correct. There's no reason that we should have 70 children that are out there. We don't have the slightest clue where they're at. And there's no reason that we don't have any idea when they first disappeared. So we don't know how long they've been gone. The thing is, we must come up with a clear process when we start from law enforcement to our courts and also to DCF, and then what happens after that, and a clear track record, so that each and every one of us know exactly what has to happen and how do we do this. So to do this, one, we have to have the right people that are on these boards and these panels, these committees, not just individuals that stand an opportunity to be able to profit from them, because anything that we have that's out that have to do with our children that we privatize, we need to bring it back inside where that we, as the governing officials, can actually keep a close eye on it, and we can pay close attention to what's going on, and we can make sure that we have accountability of each and every person and every action. And when we take a child out of its family, away from his family, or we put it into the adoption agency, then where is this child each and every moment? If the child doesn't show up to school, then we should know where this child is at and why the child didn't show up to school. We're saying that we can do a better job than their parents, so let's demonstrate that. And the only way we can do that is bring these various different agencies under one roof, and then also simplify and establish an inline process as to how we actually deal with each and every one of them.
Thank you. Mr. Bergerson?
As I've already mentioned, DCF is a mitigated disaster. I will start by making a strong example, and I will fight for the prosecution of those at the top that were involved in the gross negligence of letting our children go missing. Beyond that, I will work with DCF to begin writing a plan, a comprehensive plan for what we do when children are lost. So the second a child is found to be lost, there is a plan in place to make sure that they are found immediately, and that if they aren't found, we continue to look for them. Right now, sometimes we don't even know that. Sometimes we haven't even known that children are gone until like a week after they've been gone. So we can make sure that they have regular checkups with an officer, or we know if they don't show up for school, things like that. So we can keep track of where they are. Make sure that at least once a day that there is a report into DCF saying, okay, everyone is accounted for. If there is one person that's not accounted for, the whole DCF, they should be on their feet looking for them. And if that isn't happening, then my administration did not put the right people in there. I'll make sure that we are paying the people in DCF properly, because right now they're overworked, they're overstaffed. That is a huge problem. So we need to make sure that they are not overstaffed and overworked. They're being paid right, and there's enough people there to do the job that needs to be done to make sure that our children are truly being taken care of well.
Thank you. Senator Kelly?
Thank you. I actually serve on the Child Welfare Task Force. The legislature set this up, I think, in a very unique and constructive way. Ordinarily, when we create task force, it's often made up of only legislators, and sometimes we don't really know everything. So this one we did very differently. We've brought the courts in there. We have judges on this task force. We have guardian ad litems on this task force. We have social workers. We have foster parents. We have actually providers of the services, our contractors. They're all sitting around the table with some of us legislators, really drilling down into the problems that we're having in child welfare. It's not just one thing. It is not just foster care homes. Our courts are a problem also. We've got a lot of work to do, but we specifically set this up so that we would not make our final recommendations until January of 2019, because we knew that the Brownback-Collier administration would sabotage any efforts that we suggested. And we knew that we needed to just wait until January to put the full reform in place. In the meantime, though, I did call out the former Secretary of DCF at one of these task force meetings because she had no idea. There were 3 sisters missing from a foster care home. I told her I was going to bring this up after lunch. She had no idea that these girls were gone. They've been gone for 45 days. So I called her out in that committee. She eventually was replaced with someone else who's doing a bit better job, but doesn't have the resources right now to do that, and we've got to get that. So in addition to setting up a plan for reform, we have also got to fund that agency so that we can have social workers on the front end who can do family preservation, we can have social workers on the back end who can do reintegration and get the kids out of the system. When Sam Brownback came into office, there were 5,000 kids in that system. There are now over 7,700. They go in too easily and they can't get out. We've got to change it.
Thank you. Mr. Swati?
Well, the first thing that a state government needs to do is anytime it forms a task force, it's got to take what that task force gives them, and if it's applicable or wisely thought out, the state has to implement it. I went to a number of the meetings of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Water, which is not on DCF, but I began to kind of joke about it after a while because I was in 4-H and the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Water delivered a document exactly like what I got when I got a blue ribbon on a 4-H fair. I was proud for about 30 seconds and then I stuck the blue ribbon in a box and never heard from it again. And that's what we've been doing with our task forces. The Blue Ribbon Task Force was actually a pretty good document that they delivered. The state did nothing with it. And I think we're seeing the same thing with the Department of Children and Families. But again, I go to the crux of the issue within that agency is what has happened across state government. And I saw this firsthand because I ran a state agency in the Parkinson administration and saw what good government can do when it is staffed with appropriate and trained individuals that see themselves as civil servants and come to work every single day to make government work better for everyone else around the state. And over the last 8 years, that has been dismantled. And what happens when it's dismantled at the Department of Agriculture is that water right applications are not turned around as fast as they should be. But what happens at the Department of Children and Families, when it is understaffed, and when those individuals do not have the appropriate training, is that you then begin to lose children. And fixing that will actually take a lot of time and a lot of hard work. And that's, I think, the frustrating thing for any of us or any of the next administration, because we know the task is so large, because it's not simply fixing the person at the top of that agency. It's about restaffing that agency with highly trained social workers that can get into these families and figure out what is best for those kids. And that is hard under the very best of circumstances, with the very best of employees. And right now we're doing that with agencies that are understaffed and people that are not as trained as they should be trying to figure that out. We've got to fix that. That's going to take time, and a governor that is committed to spend that time to get it done.
Thank you. We've referenced task forces, and we're going to stay on that subject, but in a different vein. During the last legislative session, the legislature authorized 2 task forces, one for transportation and another for expansion of broadband services in rural Kansas. If you were a member of either of or both of these task forces, what would be your input for these 2 subjects, especially related to Western Kansas? And I might interject, some people think Western Kansas starts at I-435 in Kansas City, but we think it starts a little bit farther west than that. Senator Kelly, we'll let you go first.
Thank you very much. Yes, we did create those 2 task forces, and I hope they don't end up like Josh's blue ribbon and just collecting dust in some box somewhere. The Transportation Task Force was set up, and again, it includes a number of people. It's a very large task force from the industry, the highway industry in particular, but also aviation and rail. So I'm hoping that at the end of that, they're supposed to look at two things really. One will be to develop another comprehensive transportation plan, much like we've had for 30 years in the state of Kansas. And then second, that they will discover some interesting new dedicated revenue funding. You know, we have not been giving the transportation program the sales tax that we had promised them for 30 years, and that's why we are where we are today. You know, we're not going to be able to give them that back for the next couple of years anyway, and so we've got to find some other funding sources to do that. In my rural prosperity plan, we outline very specifically what roads and highways we think are particularly important, and many of them focus on Western Kansas because we understand that unless we build that infrastructure and maintain it, that your communities will never be able to attract and retain businesses. You've got to have that, and you've got to have the broadband connection. You know, I experienced it as I was driving to Garden City today, losing connection all along the way. I experienced it last weekend when I was in Lindsborg, standing in the middle of Lindsborg and had no service. That's got to change. Your communities cannot grow if we don't broaden that broadband and make sure that you have regular access, reliable access to the internet.
Thank you. Mr. Swati?
It is time once again for the state to develop a 10-year comprehensive transportation plan. We owe that to our contractors. They staff a lot of individuals around the state. They need a pipeline of projects that they can depend on over a 10-year period so they know how to staff, know how to move those individuals around the state, and we have not come through with that over the last 8 years, which is contrary to the great transportation projects that we did in the 2000s when I was also in the legislature. So we have that as a commitment to the state of Kansas, and we have to get it done, and it has to balance the public safety needs of the urbanizing portions of the state with the economic development needs of the very robust industrial agricultural portions of the state. Now on broadband deployment, I think it's time that we seriously consider how to leap forward in modernity with this. I love this statistic because it's so mind-blowing, but we pay for broadband deployment through our rural telephone companies, through the rural utility service funds. Those are small fees paid for on our landline phones, which, as you might imagine, the pool of landline phones is rapidly declining. So the people paying for broadband deployment going down rapidly. In the meantime, the broadband demand in those areas is going up. But here's the thing. Rural telephone companies, if you ask them what their bandwidth is, 45% of their bandwidth on their systems is Netflix. Netflix, not streaming video. It's one company. So imagine if we had a highway and 45% of the traffic was one company, the state would go to that company and say, you know, you probably need to pay a little more for this service. We are behind, and it's just outdated, and it's time that the state and the federal government move forward. I don't think Netflix intended for that to happen, but as technology advanced, they are now almost 50% of that bandwidth, and so these companies spend $5 or $10 million a year advancing their bandwidth to make sure the system works for people, and Netflix is paying nothing for it, and in the meantime, the landlines are paying for it. We've got to fix that if we want it to work across all of Kansas.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer?
If we're going to be successful, we must have broadband, and that's throughout the entire state of Kansas. We shouldn't have one city or one county that doesn't have it, whether it be in urban Kansas or whether it be in rural Kansas. We must make sure that happens, and we must make it a priority. That's a quality of life issue. And so when you start looking at that, taking it a step farther, you start looking at the rail system. We must have rail system throughout the entire state of Kansas. Now, what I will tell you is when I was president of Kansas League, one of the things that I did take on was passenger rail and the importance of rail systems. I came to your communities in Dodge City, Garden City, and all of western Kansas and northeast Kansas as to what it was going to take to be able to get that. And I also took a delegation to Oklahoma City to look at their system and explore exactly how that system was actually working. And the thing is the state of Oklahoma recognized that that's a quality of life issue. That's how they get communities to actually grow. But the other portion is it's never designed and it never will be one of those systems that's going to make a profit. so that we have to invest in it as a state and make sure it's a quality of life issue that's going to help us as part of our transportation system, as part of our trade system, as part of us being able to commute from city to city, or also to take our goods from various different locations to airports so that we can send them overseas or to other states or other countries. We have to do those types of things, and it's a quality of life issue, and we must make it a priority to make sure that we get those types of things done. But we must also work with you and the communities as we start defining what are the actual needs and how much of it do you need.
Thank you. Mr. Bergerson?
I compare the broadband issue of today to the electrification issue of 100 years ago. In the 1930s and 40s, President FDR set out the TVA to make sure that rural areas got the electrification they needed to make sure that they were economically viable. We need to do the same thing today with rural broadband. We need another TVA to make sure the government says, okay, yes, it won't be profitable, but this is so important to economic development. We're going to pay, and we're going to get this done, and we're going to give high-speed internet to all corners of the state, and hopefully eventually the United States. And that'll be a big issue in my administration, and I will make sure that rural Kansas is not left behind. Also, on transportation, I have always thought that we need to expand train service. We need to keep the one we have. We also need to look at trying to either have the state build it or partner with Amtrak to get more train service to rural areas and other parts of rural Kansas. As well as I actually would support looking at creating rail service within the metropolitan areas, Wichita and Kansas City. Many other metropolitan areas of those size have at least some sort of rail system for people to commute with. I think we need to look at, especially as we go into a world with less oil, we need to find ways so we can lessen our dependence on oil. And I think that's one way we can do it, is expanding rail service. And so we'll fight to keep the train here in Garden City, and we'll fight to make sure that everyone has access to transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is a fairly simple one, but rather than a yes or no simple answer, we'd like to have you explain your answer. And that is, do you believe the state of Kansas adequately funds K-12 education? And the first on this one is Mr. Swati.
No. I think that the state of Kansas is getting a lot closer to where it needs to be. But I think even if the state of Kansas satisfies the Kansas Supreme Court, it's probably still going to be under what K-12 needs. However, part of the difficulty of being governor, or part of the job of being governor, is balancing the needs of all state agencies. And I think over the next 4 years in particular, even as we know that K-12 needs more money, the finances just aren't there. There are enough finances right now to satisfy what the court needs, which is probably another $100 million this year and $100 million after that. And I think that we'll continue to see state revenues improve, in part because of the tax package that was passed, in part because oil is now at $70 a barrel, and that has an extraordinary impact on the revenues that the state brings in. That being said, the list of needs, and these are not wish lists, these are genuine needs among state agencies, are enormous. We have grossly underfunded higher education. We have needs within our mental health institutions. We have needs clearly in corrections, where we continue to see incidents across our prison system, in large part because we cannot keep corrections officers because we're paying them too little, even after giving them a raise. We have no comprehensive transportation plan because we've been robbing that money off of KDOT, and we have such extraordinarily high bonded indebtedness that my oldest son, who is 9, will be older than I am now by the time we get that paid off. So we are not funding K-12 where we need to be. We do need to fund it more. But it's going to be a long time before we ever can say, well, it's perfectly funded. I do think by getting another $100 or $200 million over the next 2 years, we will move past this cycle of litigation that we've had, because I think that it puts us on a pathway back where superintendents and school boards around the state can depend on what the state government tells them, can depend on the amount of money that they're going to give them, and we can avoid the mid-year allotments, which is what is so damaging to those school districts.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer?
To answer your questions as far as funding for K-12 and the funding, I've been disappointed in the funding process that we've had for a number of years. But the only way to describe that is just no. They're nowhere near the funding that they should be, because of the fact that we can sit down and we can figure out how much they've actually cut each and every year. And the only thing that you ever hear, and that we have only heard, is, well, they cut funding this year, so we're only going to give this much. Not recognizing the fact that this is a big impact on our children. And so we should fund them. We should treat them as the exact same priority as we do others. But also recognizing that there was an independent committee that came up and said that it was equal to almost $2 billion. That's what was needed. Well, that would have just put them at the threshold. But the thing is they came back, they said, no, we're not going to give that. Then the courts came back and they came with a figure. And they come up with a 3-year plan of $500 million. Thank you for the $500 million. But that doesn't put us to where we need to be for our children to get a fair education and the teachers to get their wages. And we also did not get a plan to say, okay, we have to be here by this time frame. And the cost of living is going to continue to go up over these next 3 years. There was no plan that was put into place. It was just, here's the money, this is going to take care of you during this time frame. We need to see, and we owe it to these children and the teachers and our communities and families, a plan as to how we're going to get to where we should be. And also, what is the dollar figure, and come up with the appropriate dollar figure that we need to where we can actually break even and make sure that those children have all the tools that they need to be able to learn. And not only that, but make sure that we create an environment where teachers are not spending the small salaries that we're giving them to buy goods and tools for the children to be able to learn.
Thank you. Mr. Bergeson?
Hell no, the state is not doing what it needs for our children, and that is a real problem in this state. What we need to do is there are many things we can look at. Of course, I've been talking about expanding rail transportation, getting more tourists into the state. That would help with our sales tax. We need to do what other states like Colorado, Washington, that legalize marijuana for recreational purposes, and the sales tax in that will help education. It has made a big difference in Colorado. We can do the same thing here in Kansas. We also need to look at other things. I think those are the two big things. And also, I think the issue is not just on the student side, although that's a big issue. I'm going to harp this home again. We need higher teacher pay. We are losing teachers to other states, and even teachers from Kansas are moving out of state. We need to keep them here by promising them that they can have a high quality, that they can have a good quality of life living in Kansas and teaching in Kansas. So I think those are really the two big things. But also, just make sure that we show a commitment to our students and our teachers that we want to do everything we can to make sure that there's enough funds. One thing, education. There are teachers that are buying their own supplies. That is a crime. Teachers do not have to take money out of their already dismal salary and go spend it on supplies. We need to make sure that we are properly funding our education. And I think those two things can help along with cleaning up state government and making sure that we get rid of all the waste that's there that benefits those who donate to the corporate, who donate to the politicians. We need to clean up the corruption. That will get rid of some excess spending. And help fund it and can give us money to help fund education.
Thank you. Senator Kelly.
You know, last year, the legislature put about $300 million into our school system. I think most of that was used to increase teacher salaries. This year, we put about $535 million into the schools. That was the plan that was sent then over to the courts, where the courts said, good job, however, you need to come back and account for the rate of inflation over those years. So we'll take care of that in January. By reversing the tax cuts, Brownback and Collier, we actually have some money in the kitty. So we'll be able to take care of that inflation factor. And then we built into the formula the consumer price index rate, so that going forward, if we keep our promise to education, we should be adequately funding it and allowing them to provide the education that we need them to do. I think the area where we need to invest more, though, is in our early childhood programs. You know, it's a huge return on investment when we do that. There are programs in the state of Kansas that are models for this, where they're capturing families prenatally before the child is even born and bringing them in and providing wraparound services and good early childhood stimulating programs. And what they're finding is that then those kids go into kindergarten, they don't need to go into special education, and later in their life they're not incarcerated. So we're getting a tremendous return on investment. As governor, I will put that as a very high priority. We also do need to restore our funding to our higher education system. There's a direct correlation between the rise in tuition that we've been seeing over the past few years and the decrease in the state general fund support that we provide for our universities. We've got to do that. College is getting priced out of the hands of many children and their families.
Thank you. The next question is on another hot topic within Kansas, and that is Medicaid. And again, rather than just a brief answer of expand or don't expand, we would like to hear your rationale. But what is your position with regard to expansion of Medicaid in Kansas? And Senator Kelly, we'll have you go first.
Well, I've sort of addressed this before. Obviously, I'm a strong advocate and always have been for Medicaid expansion. It means so much to the state of Kansas to do this. You know, as I said before, we have 150,000 Kansans out there without access to health care. We also have rural hospitals that have closed or are on the verge of closing because we have not expanded Medicaid. And all of those jobs that have not been created because we have not expanded Medicaid. So yes, absolutely, we need to do that. We need to do that not just for the people who will receive those services, but for our state as a whole. You know, healthier citizens make better workers. Our businesses need for folks to have access to health care so that they can show up for work every day. You know, our families need access to health care, so when they give birth to healthy babies. There are all sorts of reasons, which then saves the state a ton of money as we go along, if we don't have a lot of low birth weight babies. So yes, there are all sorts of reasons we should have done that. I think it's almost immoral that we have not. And you can rest assured that when I'm governor, that will be one of the first bills I hope to see on my desk, and I will sign it into law.
Thank you, Mr. Swati.
So 87% of those Medicaid expansion dollars would be going to children and seniors. A lot of people would say, well, we don't want to expand Medicaid because these are just deadbeats that don't want to work. The reality is the bulk of that money is going to two groups of people that really cannot work, and then frankly the other 13% are often people that are working sometimes 30 or 40 hours a week. They're minimum wage jobs, but they still qualify for Medicaid. These are our tax dollars. They've already been sent to DC. And it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of that program and expand it around the state because we know that this is not just about hospitals and the providers. This is in many cases about senior assisted living facilities and those providers. And then here in Western Kansas in particular, a lot of times those hospitals and those senior assisted living facilities are co-located and they have the same bottom line. So when we are starving them, that's hurting both those institutions. And these are not the sort of places that can let $50, $60, or $150,000 ride on their books for 5 or 6 months while they wait for them to be reimbursed. They don't operate on those kind of margins. They need that reimbursement right away. And so it's something that we should have done. The other thing that I have been instructed on is just how many people take advantage of the system that need that kind of help, that they need those Medicaid dollars. And I know even here in Garden City, a lot of people will deliver children that have not seen a doctor at all until they walk through that emergency room in labor. And so we have to have as many ways of helping them as possible to deliver that health care because when you deliver it from the entire spectrum of their life appropriately, that's overall lowering the cost of health care, and it's just a better system across the board.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer?
Well, plain and simple, I support Medicaid expansion, but as a former mayor, I've had an opportunity to see how important it is that we actually should have this and put something in place to be able to take care of it. Because as we know, in the private sector, many of them are starting to slowly move away from providing you any type of benefits and the appropriate type of health care without charging you for it. Most individuals cannot afford it. So I've seen those types of things, but I've also seen where some individuals that were good families and working hard, had good salaries, and things happen to them, whether it be cancer or whatever one of those diseases might be, and both parents end up losing their jobs, and they can't work, and then they don't have health care to be able to take care of them. I've seen these types of things, and then they become homeless. We must have expanded Medicaid here in the state of Kansas. There was an opportunity that we could have got $2.7 billion to be able to do it, and the president and the governor sent it back because of his disagreement with what was going on and the president we had in Washington, D.C. We can't have that type of attitude. We must create an environment where everyone has an opportunity to have health care. And when I say that, I'm like Jack. I believe that we should legalize marijuana and do just like Colorado and the other states. Legalize it, tax it, and get those dollars. Address the issue of health care, address the issue of paying teachers, address the issue of mental health, and also help with Medicaid expansion when it's not provided to us to make sure that ends meet. We must be smarter about what we're actually doing. And as governor, that will be one of the first things that I'll do is make it a priority to start working in the direction to get it where every single citizen has an opportunity to have health care.
Thank you. Mr. Bergerson?
I think this is one of the biggest issues that I prided myself on. We need to expand Medicaid, we need to do it now. We need to make sure, like many people like myself that do not currently have insurance because it's too expensive, that they can afford at least some basic form of health insurance. Beyond that, I look towards the Nevada model, which was a bill passed last year in the Nevada legislature that would have allowed people to buy into a public option, so that for people that can't get Medicaid but yet can't afford private plans, there would be an option in the middle so that most people could get health insurance. I am an ultimate believer in a national health care plan, so I think we need to look for Medicare for all eventually, but that's at the federal level, and I don't control what goes on at the federal level, and I don't think Kansas is in a place right now to implement a universal health care plan on itself. However, I must point out that Senator Kelly and her running mate Lynn Rogers have taken over $3,000 from the for-profit companies that run the privatization of CanCare. These companies have made healthcare harder, have ruined healthcare in the state and across the nation. Anyone who takes money from for-profit insurance companies cannot be trusted on the issue of healthcare. So thank you and thank you. Regardless if you do not want to vote for me, please vote for one of the other two candidates. I really want to make sure that healthcare reform is addressed in the next Democratic administration in the state.
Thank you. We were a little delayed in getting started, so we're going to run over past the 7 o'clock hour, so I hope you didn't have plans right at 7, candidates. But we have one more question, and then we'll have the closing part, so we won't be past the time very long, or very much. Last question. Why do you believe you are the most qualified person to be governor of Kansas? And on a related issue, based on two situations in the recent years, what qualities, and abilities does your running mate possess to give us confidence that that person, should he or she be called upon to complete your term as governor? And the first to go on this question, Mr. Brewer.
Well, first of all, I've already had an opportunity to represent the entire state of Kansas as president of the Kansas League. But not only that, but as mayor of the largest city in the state of Kansas with 390,000 that were actually there. Of course, everyone's well aware of the fact that Wichita is a very conservative community. I'm a Democrat. That's a proven record that I can get Democrats, Independents, and Republicans to work collectively together, but one, to focus on what's in the best interest of the people. When you start looking at that, I won that election with 69% of that 390,000. I have the experience. I come from corporate America, started from the very bottom, worked my way up, senior manager, government relations, public affairs. Started in the military, from digging foxholes, and working my way up from there to becoming an officer, commanding soldiers. I started out, as you heard me say, I started out at an early age, 16 years of age. I understand hard work. I understand commitment. I understand being a voice for those that can't speak for themselves. I started out at 16 years of age, working for Excel Meatpacking Company, pushing meat to try to help take care of my family. And I believe that that's the same philosophy that a governor must have, that he has an extended family that he must take care of. So I certainly have proven that I have the executive, I have the leadership experience, but I have the skill and the know-how to bring individuals together. When we start talking about exporting our goods, I've done that. I've brought Republicans and Democrats together to take care of what was in the best interest of communities in difficult times. There's only one person that can beat Kobach and Collier. And that clear person is me. Because not only that, but I protected the industries in western Kansas and challenged Kobach and pushed back on Kobach on his immigration issues. And some have not done that. They've allowed it to happen, and I, as governor, will not allow that. I will protect each and every family, and I will also lead by example.
And before we move forward, remember too, part of this question is about your running mate and the qualities that that person possesses, and maybe in your closing comment, you'll be able to insert some of that for us,
I can do
Mr.
that.
Brewer. And Mr. Bergeson.
Can you repeat the question, sorry?
Well, what makes you, or what causes you to believe you're the most qualified person to be governor of Kansas, and what are the qualities and abilities your running mate possesses, because that person might step in because there's been vacancies in the past several years where the lieutenant governor has stepped in.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure I had that all correct, so
Sure.
I can give people the best answer.
Sure.
I am the best candidate for governor because I know working people. My family has we have built a business. I have worked, and I have made sure, and I really care about the state. I have driven. My car actually today passed 100,000 miles today, and I bought it. I've driven like 20,000 miles in this campaign. It's crazy. But I've done that because I care about each and every Kansan, and I have spent pretty much every second of my free time campaigning because I know if I don't get in, or at least if a Democrat doesn't get in, there's going to be major ramifications for the state. We're going to continue to go further down. So I think we need a governor who's uncorrupted, and I think that's my best selling point, is I don't respond to lobbyists, I don't respond to corporate money, I respond to the people, and I have the message that people are yearning for. I was at the rally in Wichita about a week ago with Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There was over 4,000 people there. People are yearning for change, and I represent that change. My running mate, Alexander Klein, some people have met us together say, why isn't he at the top of the ticket, because somehow he's more book smart, and I'm more, let's passionate, let's go. But he has the smarts, and he has the right ideas, and he has the smarts, he has the ideas, he has the calmness, he has the ability to go in there and implement any our campaign platform if for some reason I was unable to serve. So I think we would work well as a team. I would not shove him aside. We would work as a team, as the governor, lieutenant governor. We would sit around and we would make sure that we're implementing our policy effectively, because I think our personalities, they kind of bounce off each other. I'm kind of crazy and kind of out there, and he's a little more reserved, and we can work together. I think that makes us a great team to lead Kansas, so it's not just an echo chamber. We can really have a real discussion. We don't necessarily agree on everything, but we agree on the vague vision, on the vision Kansas needs to be moving forward, and we can work great together. We can work with the legislators, we can work with the people, and that's why I think we're both the best choice. Vote Jack Bergeson and Alexander Klein on August 7th.
Thank you. Senator Kelly?
Thank you. I think I've alluded to the reason I think I'm most qualified to be governor. I have 14 years experience in the state Senate. I've been at the table for the last 8 years as Sam Brownback and Jeff Collier have really destroyed our state. So I do know where the problems are, and I do know what we need to do to fix them. And I've got the relationships in the legislature to get to work on day one and start to solve the problems facing our state. Being governor is not a one-person show. You can't get anything done if you can't work with that legislature. I know I can. I've got great relationships, not only in my own caucus, but across the aisle with the moderate Republicans, and they're chomping at the bit to get me in the governor's office because they know the door will be open, the table will be set, and we will sit around there and we will negotiate and come up with good public policy for the state of Kansas. I think that is absolutely vital. I think the other thing, particularly now with the retirement of Justice Kennedy on the Supreme Court, the fact that I am the only candidate up here who has 100% pro-woman reproductive health care rights is urgent. If they overturn Roe v. Wade on the national level, that issue comes back to the state. We need to make sure we have somebody in the governor's office who will say no to overturning the access to women's reproductive rights in this particular state. My lieutenant governor is State Senator Lynn Rogers. He is from Wichita. I picked him because I knew he could step into the role should something happen to me. He is not only a state senator, has been for a couple of years, but he also served 16 years on the Wichita School Board, and he spent 30 years as an agricultural banker. So he has been everywhere in the state of Kansas, working with our farmers, working with our co-ops, helping them make the investments and doing what they need to do to make their business industry thrive. So I have no doubt that Lynn Rogers and Laura Kelly are most qualified to be governor and lieutenant governor.
Thank you. Mr. Swati?
It's always kind of funny to listen to us because we all say we're the most qualified to do this job. But here's the pitch I would make to you. I did serve in the legislature for 7 years. I'm the only one up here that's run a state agency, and I think the combination of those things are very important. But here's what I think is different about my candidacy, and it's about my discovery of my lieutenant governor. I campaign hard around the state, and I listen to Kansans everywhere. And we've had a rough 8 years, and frankly, the job of fixing the state is larger than any gubernatorial administration or even the governor's office working with the legislature. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment, and we need to find the talent of Kansans all across the state that are willing to step up and help fix the state. And about 7 months ago, when I was on the campaign trail, I took a tour of Civic Plus, which is one of the fastest-growing companies in Manhattan, Kansas. They design software to connect municipalities to their constituents. So they basically help us make government work better. And anyway, the person giving that tour was Katrina Lewison, and she was incredible. She was dynamic, she was very knowledgeable, she was very well-spoken, and I thought, wow, this is quite the leader. And then I began asking her sort of, well, where'd you come from? What high school did you graduate? Because I'm a nosy Kansan, and that's what we do. And I started to find out, wow, this is a West Point graduate. And she served her country in Iraq, and she's a Purple Heart recipient, and she has a scholarship in her name at Buehler High School, and she has dedicated her life to leadership, not only in her community and her family, but her state and her nation. And it's those sorts of discoveries that are going to enable our administration to fix the problems in ways that the other administrations just aren't going to be able to do. Because we're listening to Kansans all around the state, because we're discovering Kansans that need to be discovered in every corner of the state, because you have talent right now in Garden City that can help solve our problems in Topeka, but it will go undiscovered if you don't have a governor that doesn't come here frequently, meet with people all up and down your main street and around the community, and get to know you and realize we can do this as a team, and that's what our ticket does that no one else does.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the question and answer portion of tonight's forum, and some of you may feel like you've already given your closing statements, but I know you have more to give us. So at this time, we do invite you to provide a 2-minute closing statement, and Mr. Bergeson, you'll be first.
All right, before I give you my final pitch, I'm going to address a lie I just heard Laura Kelly mention. She is not the only candidate that has a 100% pro-choice record. Although I don't have any record, I have me and Carl Brewer are 100 and always have been 100% pro-choice. She is trying to smear. Make sure you are informed when you make your vote if that is an important issue to all of us. And please be informed that she is trying to deceive you. Now, remember, Jack Bergeson and Alexander Klein, they want to work for you. They don't want to work for the corporations. They don't want to work for big business. They don't want to work for the big special interests. They want to work for you. I have campaigned this state since last September because I know what this election means. And I know that if we do not elect a strong progressive candidate that is willing to fight on all issues, we are going to have an issue in this state. And we will continue to spiral down and down into oblivion. We need to have someone who's a strong leader and who believes in progressive values. If we do not have that, Kansas will not come back from the hole we are in right now. So please consider, when you make your vote, who has the ideas and who has the right idea and who has the conviction to go into Topeka next January and really make Kansas a haven for working people once again. I'm Jack Bergeson. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kelly?
For the past 8 years, Kansas has been in a world of hurt. It doesn't matter where you look. If you look at our schools, or our roads, or our economy, or our healthcare, it has all been devastated. And we can either choose to endure 4 more years of devastation, or we can elect a governor who will fight like the devil to rebuild our state. I think after all the years of crisis and turmoil that we have been through, we need a strong and a steady and an experienced leader to go into our governor's office. I have spent my career standing up for working men and women, and as governor, I will continue to do that. I will make schools a priority. I will get our economy moving again, and I will unite our state and put the nightmare of the Brownback Collier years behind us once and for all. Together, we can rebuild our state. I am Laura Kelly, and I ask for your vote on August 7th.
Thank you. Mr. Swati?
So last night, we stopped by the Pawnee County Democratic Party. It was in their courthouse at 6 o'clock. I got there at about 6:05. We walked into the courthouse. It was dark, and then I saw the room, and I saw my cousin Wendy, who lives in Larned, and I saw my friend Harry, and then 4 other people, which is kind of the size of the Pawnee County Democratic Party. So came in, said hi. I plopped down in the chair. We would start laughing, talking like a candidate for statewide office. I sort of sucked the oxygen out of the room, started telling stories. Everyone was laughing. And I finished and took a breath, and my cousin Wendy looked at me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, is this not the Pawnee County Democratic Party that I was scheduled to talk to? She said, "No, this is the Pawnee County Health Department meeting." And we all started laughing, and everyone was there, and Leroy had handed out my palm cards to everyone. We were all set to go. We stepped out. I called our point person at the Pawnee County Democratic Party. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you, they had the room tonight, so we're 2 blocks east." So I went over there. The point I give in telling that story, there are 3 million people in Kansas. I don't know them all, but I'm related to about 50% of them. And for Democrats in particular, these have been a hard 8 years, and this is not a joke. It is important for us to win this next election, and we know what is waiting for us on the other side of the Republican primary. It's vital that we win. And I have campaigned all across the state because I love the state. And when I stop in Pawnee County, I see people that are my friends and relatives, even when I get the wrong meeting. And I care so deeply about the state that I will not rest until we win this election. And I think that all of you know that because you've seen me so frequently here in Garden City. It's a commitment that I have to the entire state of Kansas. It's a commitment that I will carry through the general election and then on into the governor's administration. We have got to fix Kansas. We've got to do it with people that are bright, that bring different perspectives, different viewpoints, and a brighter, fresher optimism back to the state of Kansas to carry us all forward and remind everyone that Kansas is willing to invest in its future again. The Swati Lewison ticket does that. Join us at joshuaswati.com. Thank you so much for coming out this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Brewer?
Well, again, I want to thank you for hosting this event tonight, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and coming back here to Garden City. But what we have to have somebody that has integrity, that has the leadership, executive experience, and somebody that's going to bring a different change here to the state of Kansas. And I certainly do that. I've led the largest city in the state of Kansas. I've represented every city in the state of Kansas. I've worked with you as far as when you trade and export. I've been there when many communities, small communities, had needs or whether disasters had struck, and I made sure that when the people woke up that morning, they had the people right there. But the other portion is, I think that's important, is it has to be a team effort. And the team meaning you have to have an opportunity to have a voice, and you have to have a leader that's not afraid to come and talk to you, to meet with you, and get your input and make sure that you are at the table. We haven't had that. And I don't see anybody that's going to provide that. And one of the most important things that I did is I wanted someone that was willing to do the exact same thing and is equally passionate about the people of Kansas I am. And I did. I got that person. Chris Morrow, mayor of the city of Gardner, very conservative community, can work on Democrats and Republicans and work with them collectively and get them to focus on what's in the best interest of their communities and their families. But even more so important, I got a guy that was supportive of women's reproductive rights, and there would be no wavering from him in any way, the exact same way it is with me. Now, in this race, we are the ones that are the true blue candidates. We protect women's reproductive rights. But I can assure you that one of the individuals, Senator Kelly's running mate, it was just before he was elected Senate, he was with the pro-life movement and listed on their website. So I don't see how, if something happened to you, that you are going to come back and expect those types of things to still be in place and protect people.
Please join me in thanking these 4 participants for their willingness to share their thoughts and ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about ready to wrap this up, but if you would be patient with me for a couple minutes. I'd like